The highly valuable magical weapons named Wave, Whelm, and Black Razor have been stolen from their vaults in the city of Greyhawk. Rewards have been posted, servants hanged, and even the sanctity of the Thieves' Guild has been broken. Only a cryptic reference to a long dead wizard and their lair beneath a volcanic mountain point the way. Come with me, adventurers, as we head to White Plume Mountain. Hi everyone, I'm Gary, and welcome back. We are going to talk about another adventure today. We are going to talk about something that's really, really cool. I say that every time, but I really do love this stuff, and I only review and talk about the stuff that I think is really interesting that other people should be playing. So, we are going to look at S2 White Plume Mountain. It's the second adventure in the special series, and it is an 18-page booklet, including the handouts, published for AD&D First Edition in 1979. It's by Lauren Schick. And Schick wrote this as a kind of submission to TSR, asking for a job. And what happened was Gary Gygax got this, and he was so impressed that he went, "Oh, this is brilliant!" And they just published it straight away. Schick wasn't expecting that, and they just sent it out. So it's really interesting as an example dungeon because it's doing lots of things that other dungeons don't have to do. It's kind of showing off Schick's best ideas. Um, it's to be run for characters of 5th to 10th level. I own 2 copies of it. I own one of it in this 2014 reprint, Dungeons of Dread. And I read that when it first came out, and that was the first time I came across it in this. And that was, what, 10 years ago. So that was wonderful. And I also own the 5th edition reprinting of this. In Tales of the Yawning Portal for 5th edition. And both versions are good, but they're good for different reasons. I'll talk about those. So, my bona fides before we get going. What systems have I run it with? I've run it once for AD&D. I have run it 3 times for 5e and once with Gem. And one of those times, it was the AD&D time, was a one-shot. We didn't come back to the characters. And the other times, it was part of an ongoing campaign. I actually, once when I ran it for 5e, I inserted it into the Storm King's Thunder 5e campaign. The characters were in Icewind Dale, and they needed some help from a wizard, and he said, "Well, I've had this item store. I need you to go and get it from this mountain." So it's a really good modular adventure that you can fit in anywhere. It's a good dungeon crawl, and every time I ran this, including with my own old school system Gem, it was with mixed level parties. So let's talk about the through line. What's the overview? What's going on? Basically, there's 3 magical weapons, and they're really powerful. A trident named Wave, a hammer named Whelm, and a sword named Black Razor, which is really just Black Razor is just, and Schick admits this in the preamble to this particular reprint, that it's just a reference, it's a homage, it's just ripping off Michael Moorcock's Stormbringer, Elric of Melniboné's sword. So these 3 weapons have been stolen by a seemingly long dead wizard called Caraptis. And what's happened is they've recently vanished from their vaults. And a cryptic message has been left. And what has happened, cryptic reference to this mountain, White Plume Mountain, which is where Caraptis once lived. So the characters at the start of the module, they've had all this information. They've traveled to a hillside near White Plume Mountain, which is this enormous kind of steaming volcano. They've stored their kind of heavier stuff in a little cave called the Dead Knoll's Eye Socket, and they are preparing to go into the dungeon, which is a fun house affair. And there's 3 kind of different areas in the dungeon for each of these things. I really, really love this module. Like, I have run this. When I sat down, I'm not even sure I've necessarily remembered all the times I've run this. I've run this so many times. I've run it for new players. I've run it for experienced players. I think it is wonderful. It is a funhouse dungeon, which means that there is seemingly lots of different random things going on. Now, some people will, say like, "Oh, funhouse dungeons, they don't make sense. I don't want to run them. We don't do that anymore." It's like, what a nonsense. Right? This is Schick at his best. It's his best ideas for a job application. He's stuck them all in this module, and it's a wizard who set up this kind of like mad capering kind of affair anyway. So it makes sense even if you are someone who obsesses about naturalism. So you should definitely get it. So the players enter the dungeon, and even getting into the volcano is no easy affair. They don't climb in through the top, which steams continuously this white plume. It's what we call White Plume Mountain. It's like it's steaming. It's not like fiery. It's not like lava or anything coming out. It's steam. And what happens is, instead of going in through that way, they find a tunnel which kind of breathes burning steam every few seconds or so. And then there's kind of like a lapse in the kind of excretion of the mountain. and that at which point the players can rush in and get through this trapdoor and get away from this kind of burning steam. It is really good fun. I play that in like real time always. Every time I run it, I go, right, 10 seconds, 9, 8, 7, and the players got to say, okay, I'm running now, running now. Okay, 6, right, you get to the door, what are you doing? 5, 4, and then they have to get in. And then what happens is once they enter the dungeon proper, they go down a spiral staircase and water. This is quite a watery dungeon. There's like it's described as stiflingly warm. A big portion of the dungeon itself is kind of like knee deep in lukewarm water. There's lots of kind of like hidden pools and things like that. It's really good fun. It's like, oh yeah, this is like really interesting environment. So they enter the dungeon. And the first thing they come to is a Sphinx who gives them a really, really easy riddle. It's a really good example of the riddle that you should kind of give, a puzzle that you should kind of give. I always think when it comes to running puzzles, you need to make sure that they're really easy, because what you want is people having the enjoyment of succeeding in getting it, not in kind of sat there scratching their heads and ultimately going, okay, just roll an intelligence test and you can move through. They meet this Sphinx who lowers this magical barrier once they answer this really, really easy riddle. And they are given 3 paths. And I'll just talk you through the 3 paths because each one leads to a different weapon. So there is one that leads through a series of traps. Oh, it's wonderful. There's this long corridor with copper plates that as you move along it, the plates heat up any kind of metal that the characters are wearing. And by the time they get to the end of the corridor, if they're wearing metal armor, it's burningly hot and they can't go any further. So the characters always have to kind of like strip off and take their armor off and figure out a way to get their armor through this kind of this slow trap, which is just great. You know, most traps are like, right, save versus agility or whatever, otherwise you take damage. That isn't this. They can feel it coming and they go, okay, we need to step back because we're not going to be able to get through this. But what's really cool is that at the other side of this coppery kind of like this like burning trap, this like magical field that as they pass through everything heats up, there is a secret room. The corridor continues on, but there's a secret room that has a group of ghouls in it, and they just when you send your fighter through and they just got their they're not wearing their armor, they're wearing like their bedclothes, right? And they're pulling their armor through like with a rope or however you're going to get it through, or with a floating disc or whatever. These ghouls attack and they grab them and they just drag them through the wall. It's just like, oh, this is exactly these kind of things that split up the party slightly, that make things not just such a pitched battle. It's really, really cool. So they continue that way. They come through another room. It is, when I say it's a funhouse dungeon, I mean it is like a funhouse at a carnival. There's all these really weird things going on. So they come to the next room. There's no friction on the floor, so they're sliding all over in the spike pits. There's an invisible wall at the end with a spike pit behind it. So it's like, ha, I've jumped over to the end, and then it's like, whew, you slide through the last wall and into the spike pit. They get through that. They can fight a series of bandits. There's an underground kind of river that they can come across. And eventually, they make it to the chamber of Black Razor. And Black Razor is in an inverted pyramid. It's like kind of like pyramidal. It goes down like that, like into a pit at the bottom, to a doorway at the bottom. And on each layer of this pyramid, it's like glass fronted, and there's a series of monsters they have to overcome. They climb down, they figure out how to get across these things down to the bottom of the pyramid. And they go through the doorway at the bottom, and it's like this luxurious bedchamber, and there's a halfling in there. But what it actually is an Oni, an ogre mage, who has been set to guard Black Razor, and he can attack them. And that's really just fantastic fun. So that's how they get Black Razor. They do all that, then they trace their way back to the beginning. One thing when running this, that can be a little bit annoying when they get to the end of the bit and they've kind of got to figure their way back. If it's like a faff to get back, I usually just say, okay, like 3 random encounter tests or 2 random encounter tests, and we're just going to like just do it. We're going to assume you're taking all your armor off and all that kind of stuff again. They get back to the beginning. They go through the middle section. This is where Wave the Trident is kept, and a lot of this is underwater. And there's a couple of things. There's a hidden pool with kelpie in it that try and lure them in. That's really good fun. There's also, as I say, it's like a fun house. Like literally, there's a tunnel that they pass through or can pass through, that has it's like a tunnel that spins. It's cylindrical, but it's covered in oil, and a bandit can send a fire arrow through a crossbow bolt at the end and set the whole thing up. So it's like, I want to be one of those things, a carnival that's spinning round, but it's also all firing. You're like, all the players are screaming, you're laughing, and like, it's everything that we want from a game. They come to the chamber with Wave. And in there, what it is, oh God, it's so good. Every time I run it, I just think this is what I want from the game. So they enter the chamber, and it's kind of like it's in an underground lake. It's like a gel igloo. They enter through this kind of like gel, kind of like underwater tunnel, and the superheated water on the other side of this tunnel. They can see it. They're in a vast cavern that's filled with water, and then they come to this like igloo bubble, and there is the rock with the trident on it with wave. But guarding it is an enormous crab, and I love giant enemies. You know, like giant things like giant weasels, giant badgers, like giant crabs, giant spiders. Oh yeah. What's really cool about this is that they're fighting this thing, but they are trying their best not to puncture this kind of membranous igloo wall. If they do, superheated water is going to rush in and kill them all. And it is so much fun watching the players negotiate that particular combat. They often, you know, smart players are not going to use arrows. They're not going to use damaging magic, apart from things like magic missile, which are always going to hit. They're going to be really, really, really careful how they use their kind of like longer melee weapons. It's really good fun. And they're going to be careful about what the crab does. Otherwise, they're all going to end up as seafood, right? So they get the trident. All the weapons are really, really good fun as well. They go back, go the final way. There's a puzzle room with a series of iron golems which have prime numbers stamped on their chests, and they have to figure out which one is the wrong one. And they come to another chamber where what it is in this room, it's a giant cavern, and there's a lake of boiling mud. I mean, boiling mud, not lava, boiling mud. It's like, oh yeah, like more of this. And hanging from the ceiling is a series of like wooden discs that they can kind of like jump onto and swing across the next one. And it's just like watching our players figure out how they're going to get across this in a way that is not going to sort of result in the deaths of any planet. Because there's a lot of stuff in this mod. If they fail, they die like instantly. And sometimes I think the temptation is to change modules like this to go, oh no, you know, like you just take X amount of damage. No, like you fall in boiling mud, or you pierce that membrane where the crab is, you die. Or you almost certainly die. Because what happens is the joy becomes sitting back and letting the players come up with contingencies. Oh, why did we tie ourselves together? Can one of us sit on floating disc? And oh, what about I can cast fly? Oh, we got that. And I got a potion of gaseous form. It comes to them coming up with contingencies that can be really fun. So they get across this room with the boiling mud. It's really good fun every single time. And every few minutes or so, there's a geyser of boiling mud that blows up from the floor. There's two of them, and it's just like, oh, this is great. And the final room they come to there is a vampire's lair. Level draining enemy. Yes. And they fight the vampire, and then they get the hammer, which, by the way, gives them like agoraphobia. They don't like being outside of underground. They always want to be underground when they're carrying a whelm. And all of the weapons have these particular restrictions to them. So they get all these three weapons, and then they head back. And as they are leaving, a pair of Ifrit turn up. There is a secret chamber which leads deeper into the dungeon, but there's no deeper into the dungeon provided. It's just implied that the player characters don't see Caraptis. These two Ifrit come up and say, give us the items, come deeper with us. And Shik gives a few paragraphs where he talks about what happens if the players agree, and they can kind of be brainwashed by Caraptis in the deeper levels, or you can expand the dungeon if you want. This module is wonderful. You should be running this. Just forget what the haters say, right, about Funhouse Dungeons. This is so much fun. I believe when designing dungeons or adventure sites, we often make the mistake as game masters of going, oh, I'm not going to do that here because that's a really good idea, and I want to make sure that the players engage with it properly. It's like, no, you put your best ideas into that adventure every single time. Every session, you bring your A game. Every single adventure you write, you bring your best ideas. Because your imagination is bottomless. Shik does exactly that here. He has done this to get a job at TSR, and he has done a lot more than get a job at TSR with this, right? This is a module that will be remembered for ever. I would really recommend running this module as part of a wider campaign. I don't think it works necessarily as a one-shot. It can work as a one-shot, but I think it works better where player characters have a reason to go into the campaign, into White Plume Mountain. It is wonderful, as I've said many times already. Have a look at it, have a read of it. I'll put a link below on Drive through so you can see it. I'll put a link below to a free version of my game, Journeyman Expert Master, which I've used to run this before. As ever, you have been a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me. Like and subscribe to all that good stuff, and I will speak with you again soon.